Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this live webinar hosted by the Stanford Internet Observatory. My name's Alex Stamos. I'm the director of the observatory. For those of you who haven't joined us before, the Stanford Internet Observatory is a part of the Cyber Policy Center here at Stanford, part of the Freeman Spogli Institute here on campus. I'm coming to you from Encina Hall, where life has once again returned to campus. I have been almost killed by undergraduates on bicycles multiple times. So we know that something is coming back to life, at least here at Stanford. As a lot of people here, I'm sure know, there has been a fascinating debate over the last couple of years about how to handle the safety issues involving end-to-end encryption, particularly on messaging products. We have done a series of events over the last 2 years on this. We've done public events, we've done private consultations, and in doing so, we've brought together people from the child safety world, from law enforcement, from tech companies, from privacy advocates, excuse me, and academics to discuss the various ways that we can look at the different safety and privacy impacts of all of these different products and what can be done to mitigate some of the safety impacts while maintaining privacy. About a month ago, Apple really brought this discussion to the forefront with a series of proposals they made on a variety of different child safety topics. As you can imagine, this caused quite a firestorm of lots of different opinions. There was a lot of really kind of not very technically correct or thoughtful initial reactions. I think in the month afterwards, we've had more interesting discussion and thoughtful discussion. But part of our goal here today is to let you hear directly from some of the smartest and most informed representatives of all of the different equities. Before we get started, I just want to give a pitch to those of you who are in academia or those of you in industry who want to publish things that are a little more academic. At the observatory, we have launched a new journal of online trust and safety. This is a peer-reviewed journal. We've been published 3 or 4 times a year, and the goal is for us to have all kinds of folks from different backgrounds publishing academic empirical work on the abuse of the internet and different mechanisms to prevent that abuse. If you go to tinyurl.com/journal trust and safety, that will take you to the details for our submission process. So let's talk a little bit about our batting order today. So first we will hear from Apple to talk, and we'll hear about some of their proposals and the way they're doing threat modeling for it. And then you'll hear from a variety of folks. I'll give them each introductions, all of whom have different opinions here. We obviously have not told folks what they're supposed to say, but just so you understand kind of the framing here, one thing we asked our friends at Apple to try to explain a little bit of their modeling of what are the different kinds of goals of the system that they built. And then for each of these other folks, we asked them to say, what is it that they want out of companies, right? So we've had a lot of people just complaining about the balance, but in the end, you have to make a decision, right? That's the hard part of this. Somebody has to make a decision on how to balance these equities. So what we'd like is to actually hear from these folks. What is their proposal? What would like they see happen? Don't just criticize the other side or criticize any proposals, but let's try to be a little bit productive. And these are incredible people, and I think we're going to hear that from all of them. To start us off, we have Eric Neuenschwander from Apple. Eric is a privacy engineer who trained here actually at Stanford and has done some incredible work at Apple in a variety of projects, as well as working on this set of proposals. So Eric, please take it away.
All right, thanks, Alex, and thanks everybody for convening this. So I wanted to start off and just kind of talk a little bit about the timeline for those who maybe haven't followed this too closely. We announced some new innovative child safety features in August that would come to some of our future updates. And then, as Alex said, there was a lot of feedback. And so 2 weeks ago, we announced we'll take additional time to collect input before we release the features. So I'm here today to both review what we announced in the form that we announced it back then, but also to listen to input. So to back up, you're going to hear others on the panel, I think, today talk about how the risks to child safety are a large and growing problem on digital platforms. And those are issues both with the ongoing exchange of known CSAM, which apologies for the unfortunate terms, but child sexual abuse material, and also developing new victims through messaging apps. And we at Apple believe that we have a role in both of these. And so our consideration was in balancing both user privacy and effective protections for children. And toward that end, we announced 3 features: some enhancements to Siri and search, communication safety and messages, and CSAM detection in iCloud photos. I'm going to talk about those last 2 today. So jumping into communication safety and messages. So messages can be used to groom future victims through normalizing sharing of compromising photos. And if the attacker collects something compromising, they can then blackmail and kick off even worse abuses. So we designed a feature in the Messages app to help disrupt this. It uses on-device machine learning classification, and parents can opt into this for child accounts that are part of iCloud families. The way that it works is to detect locally on the child's device if an image that's been received or is about to be sent is a nude photo, and then provide on-device interventions to the child written in language for children, asking them to consider if this is a good situation. Furthermore, for children under 13, we propose that parents can turn on additional child notifications to the parent's device. So after the child confirms an action for each image and is told that the parent will be notified, then for these younger children, the parent will be notified about the action on their device and the content remains on the child's device. So as we were thinking about threats for the communication safety feature, the first was the scope of the data access. And so this feature does not offer notifications beyond those to the parents for younger children. In particular, compared to the feature I'll talk about in a little while with CSAM detection, there's no reporting to law enforcement. In fact, there's no reporting to Apple. Apple learns nothing about the communications of the users, including if any images were detected and if any notifications were sent. There's also, and just to be super clear, no access to the on-device data. In fact, parents need the passcode to the child's device if they're going to access any content to the communications. Second threat to consider is scope creep. All of this is built into the device, which gives us a couple of good properties. First, and you'll hear me repeat this throughout, Apple releases one global operating system. So we don't have support for targeting individual people or communities. And people can inspect this, both in terms of the software update mechanism and the operating system image as distributed around the world. That means that capabilities can be inspectable by researchers. When the binary code is out there, people can confirm that the feature works the way that we say. People can report issues if it's not working the way that we say. Now, a third thing to consider is false positive matches. I said that this uses on-device machine learning and an image classifier. And that means as part of classification, we have to accept that there will be some false positive matches. To help protect against this, all the actions related to communication safety remain under user control. The child can view any image, and the child can also avoid sending notifications if the parents opted into that additionally. We can think more generally about abuse of the feature, and we put in a number of steps to help mitigate that. First, it requires an iCloud family account relationship. This isn't something that can be set up between any two arbitrary accounts. The parent has to opt into the feature and can only opt into the feature for accounts marked as children in the iCloud family. Even once they do that, there's clear notice to the child each time the feature is invoked. And older children can choose to leave the family. And that means that they lose access to some of the family sharing features, but it also means that they wouldn't be subject to the communication safety feature. And there are further protections for younger accounts against changing account ages to prevent against that freedom. So overall, the child remains in control and nothing is shared without them confirming the action. Lastly, I haven't brought up encryption through any of this yet because this is a feature of the application and it doesn't relate to iMessage, which is our end-to-end encrypted communication. I'm sure we'll hear some debate on this, but we didn't change anything about the encryption. End-to-end encryption, in our view, is a way to protect against unknown or unintentional disclosure of transmitted data. So that doesn't occur here. Any user who enables communication safety and messages retains control over what is sent and to whom. They can go share that message with the parent. That's something that they can do today as well. Communication safety is about the on-device intervention and for children who confirm actions and are younger, the notification to the parent. Okay, because of limited time, I'm going to move on quickly to CSAM detection and iCloud photos. And again, to start from the background, we looked at this initially with there being two options. One would be not to scan photo libraries, which is the state that Apple is in today. The second, which is used by many other companies, is to scan every photo of every account that's in the cloud service. And the first option we think we need to move off of to help respond to the growing threats against child safety on our and other platforms. We don't want to support users that store this illegal material in our service. But the second option doesn't meet our privacy bar. I'll talk through the threats in a moment, but it has significant limitations if we scan the cloud. So we propose instead a hybrid system that uses cryptography to let Apple learn just about known CSAM images in accounts that have a collection of known CSAM in iCloud photos. I'm not going to go deep into the technology today, but we have details and academic analyses published at apple.com/child safety. And just a few quick points. First of all, it applies only to iCloud photos. It doesn't give access to any data on the device and was designed to prevent that. It requires a server step to actually disclose any information about the account. Secondly, compared to the feature I just talked about, it doesn't use machine learning or image classification. This is fundamentally an exact match against a database of known CSAM from child safety organizations. In the US, where we propose to launch it first, that would be the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Critically, the system doesn't expose any information about users or libraries unless they possess a collection of known CSAM in iCloud photos. And we've tuned the system so that we expect the false positive rate to be 1 in 1 trillion account per year. And then lastly, even after the system flags this collection of images in an account, it goes to Apple's child safety team to review before making a referral to NCMEC. So again, thinking about the threats, one to consider is that there could be some false reporting of accounts through image injection. And so first, you can look at this in different ways, but if it's going to be something that's an attack on the device or the account, we have industry-leading security on the devices and default two-factor authentication for iCloud accounts. So it's a high bar to directly attack the user in that way. But you could think about how there might be an application that has been given permission to add images to the user's iCloud photo library. And so then to think about what happens is that the result is an account would incorrectly reach our manual review phase. There's no action taken against the user, no referral to law enforcement. Instead, the referral would be actually to the engineering teams to determine what was going on. So I think it's unlikely that somebody going after the accounts would not have more interesting mayhem they could do against the user. And a real false positive attack would actually require CSAM just to hit the manual review, which is, again, a high bar to the attacker. But you can still ask questions about how will we know or how will we control that the system is only truly about detecting known CSAM? And this relates to both the generation and the distribution of the CSAM hash database. Apple can't observe the hash generation, so we account for incorrect hashes through a technical protection to use an intersection between hashes from two organizations in separate jurisdictions, and through a process protection, again, that the system refers just for manual review, not for automated reporting. Secondly, the way that this hash database is distributed, again, relies on our operating system. It's included with no remote updates. And that means it's, again, inspectable by the security community. And on top of that, we pledge to publish the hash of that database, each database that's released publicly, so users can confirm on their individual device if it matches the global hash that Apple's published. And lastly, we'll include an auditor in Apple's steps of the generation process. But then a third risk that people brought up was a slippery slope argument. This is a common concern that if the system can identify one image for CSAM, then why not identify just any image that's for a government? And first, you should consider this in the context of cloud scanning. We think this system is more protective than scanning every image of every user account in a way that is not transparent and not inspectable by anyone in the security community. Our matching database, along with any updates, is tied to OS updates and therefore transparent and universal. The algorithm that does the matching is in the operating system. It's tied to the operating system in the same way. We also included a threshold for matches, which means the system is not useful for detecting individual images, and it includes the manual review step. So at the end, the system refers it to Apple employees who will inspect the account to see if it's illegal material. The last quick point to make is that this analysis is something that we conducted regarding US law and US policy. We would evaluate for any other region before we released it. And if you think about it, prior to us releasing the feature, if there's a government order saying you must deploy that feature here, then that's telling us to ship a feature that's not ready. This could happen, but it could happen regardless of our efforts here. It could happen to any cloud provider who has access to user data today. So the technical protections I've touched on make it more challenging to change the system than the current state of the art in our opinion. So I know I've gone a little bit over, so just quickly, again, this is an overview of where we started. We remain committed to releasing features to address these critical concerns for child safety, and we look forward to engagement with the many stakeholders here to get to that point. And thanks again.
Thank you so much, Eric. Great. So next we're going to hear from Hani Farid. Hani is a professor of electrical engineering and computer science, or EECS, at Berkeley. Like we could say, you can't spell geek without a double E, as well as an associate dean at the iSchool. Hani's one of the original inventors of photodNA. So photodNA is by far the most popular algorithm that is used these days to detect CSAM, which thank you, Eric, for defining that for folks, for detecting CSAM in large cloud providers. Not something that would work directly in this kind of situation, but Hani is one of the world's experts in perceptual hashing and has done a lot of work in this area, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Thank you. Thank you, Hani.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Eric, for that very nice, concise description of the technology. I think a lot of the media has gotten quite a bit wrong in the description of the technology, so it's nice to hear that very crisp definition. I'm going to talk a little bit from the child safety side, and you'll hear some more from my colleagues on this. I think most people know that for over a decade now, most major online services have been using a form of robust or perceptual hashing to limit the spread of child sexual abuse material, CSAM. Over the past decade, we've also seen an increase in the volume of CSAM, with younger and younger victims subjected to more and more violent acts. So for example, according to a 2019 federal sentencing report, here are some statistics for you to consider what the scope and the scale of the issues are. 52% of offenses included images or videos of infants or toddlers, not preteens, not teens, but infants and toddlers, more than half. 48% of offenders engage in aggravated sexual conduct prior to or concurrently with the CSAM charge. So this is not just about possessing material, these are hands-on offenders, nearly half. 84% of cases required sentencing enhancements for images depicting sadistic or masochistic conduct or abuse to an infant or a toddler. And 77% of cases required sentencing enhancements for possession of 600 or more images. We are not talking about a small volume of content. We are talking about increasingly younger and younger children subjected to increasingly violent acts. As Alex mentioned, photo DNA is perhaps one of the most widely used hashing technologies. Itself was modeled after similar technologies used to protect copyright infringement and fight various forms of cyber threats, from spam to malware and viruses. By extracting a distinct digital signature from previously identified CSAM, this technology can selectively and accurately identify CSAM upon upload to an online service. You heard Eric describe similar technology with Apple's neural hash. Despite, however, the similarity to widely used cybersecurity technologies, programs like PhotoDNA, even a decade ago, initially met, and in some cases continue to meet, with resistance from some. Despite many doomsday predictions, however, this hashing technology did not lead to the predicted threats to civil liberties. With this backdrop, we now arrive at Apple's recent announcements and the motivation for this gathering, for which we are thankful to Alex and Stanford for organizing. Apple announced the upcoming release of hashing technology to detect CSAM and photos synced to iCloud. And it's important to remember that these are synced to iCloud. Unlike Apple's hashing technology that has for years operated on their email service, this new technology was designed to work within an end-to-end encrypted service. In particular, unlike email services in which the email is visible to the service provider and is scanned for all forms of cyber threats, from CSAM to spam to malware and viruses, photos stored in Apple's iClouds are encrypted. And this means that the photos stored in iCloud can't be hashed with existing technologies like PhotoDNA. So as you heard from Eric, instead of removing encryption on the iCloud, which opens up a whole other set of problems for everybody, Apple's new technology performs the hashing computations on your device before photos are synced to the cloud. The decision to hash on the device was done to be more privacy preserving than hashing after upload. And in particular, by scanning on your device, if an image doesn't match a previously identified piece of CSAM, then Apple cannot infer anything about your photos, and your photos remain fully encrypted when stored in the cloud. Now, the primary criticism of Apple's new technology is not that they're hashing photos stored on the cloud, but where this computation is occurring within an end-to-end encrypted service and on the potential for abuse, which you heard Eric mention. Matthew Green and our own Alex Stamos, for example, wrote in the New York Times, and I quote, while Apple has vowed to use this technology to search only for child sexual abuse material and only if your photos are uploaded to iCloud, nothing in principle prevents this sort of technology from being used for other purposes and without your consent. Eric addressed this concern a little bit, and I'm going to address it a little bit more. First, it's important to understand that hashing technology is only capable of detecting previously identified material and cannot be used for generic surveillance to, for example, detect a category of images or images containing a specific individual. This means that unless a photo you take matches pixel by pixel a previously recorded image, image hashing is completely unable to reason about or infer anything about your photos. Second, with the specter of what if and hypotheticals, many purported privacy-focused services should be considered suspect. WhatsApp, for example, boasts, and I quote, "When end-to-end encrypted, your message and calls are secured so only you and the person you're communicating with can read or listen to them, and nobody in between, not even WhatsApp." WhatsApp, however, scans all text messages to protect users against spam and malware. According to the FAQ, WhatsApp automatically performs checks to determine if a link is suspicious. To protect your privacy, these checks are, wait for it, done entirely on your device. Using Green's and Stamos' argument, this suspicious link technology could be equally abused to prevent the sharing of specific websites, or could be expanded with mission creep to monitor your text or certain words or phrases. And third, if you're concerned that Apple, either by choice or under pressure from your or foreign government, is going to misuse the technology in your product, I will very gently suggest that you not strap a device to your face for 16 hours a day that contains a microphone, a camera, and a GPS tracker, each of which can be weaponized significantly worse than an image hashing algorithm. And I see Alex smiling. I'm looking forward to this conversation afterwards. A couple last thoughts, if I may. From the child safety side, I would argue that Apple's technology, respectfully, is at best incremental and does not, in fact, go far enough to protect children. First, the hashing technology has been well understood for over a decade, and Apple is coming relatively late to this game. Second, Apple is only addressing still images, despite the fact that videos constitute nearly half of the more than 65 million pieces of content reported to NCMEC last year. And of course, any user can disable the analysis by simply turning off iCloud photo syncing. Also, from the child safety side, I often hear this issue framed as pitting privacy against safety. And I think that this is a flawed way to view this issue. Child safety is a privacy issue, that of the child's victim. Photo DNA and similar hashing technology were not developed as a law enforcement tool. Although they've been used in law enforcement, they were developed to protect the rights and privacy of children who are re-victimized each time images of their sexual abuse are reshared, in some cases millions of times a year for decades on end. We should have a vigorous debate about these technologies and how to balance personal liberties with safety and security. We should also have an honest debate about what these technologies can and cannot do as we consider the balance between those. I look forward to that debate. Thank you very much. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Hani. Great. So next, we're going to Daniel Gilmore from the ACLU. Daniel's a staff technologist, which I think is a pretty reasonably recent invention at the ACLU, and has a background in computer security, has done work for the Debian project and with the IETF. Look very much forward for. So first, Daniel, do you mind just talking just very quickly about your position, and then what your about what a staff technologist does at the ACLU, and then talk about the ACLU's position here? That'd be great.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
You're really quiet again. You might want to.
Okay. I will adjust. Sorry about that. Yeah. Thanks for.
Still really quiet. You might.
Daniel.
Yeah. I'm bringing up the volume here. Hopefully this is better and I've not just blown out anybody's eardrums.
That's better. Thank you.
Great. So thanks for having me here. This is an interesting and pressing and ongoing and decades-old topic. So I'm happy to be present. As a staff technologist at the ACLU, I do work at the intersection of technology and civil liberties. So that means thinking about the various civil rights and civil liberties that the ACLU is concerned about, and thinking about the way that our infrastructure, our technical infrastructure, either supports them or potentially puts them at risk. So for example, thinking about when we have network communications, are those communications going to be encrypted or not? If they're not encrypted, what additional infringements are possible by, say, governments or other bad actors who might want to either surveil people or curb their speech? So this is quite on point for the sort of work that I'm doing here. So I want to just flag at the outset that Apple announced 3 different features at once. So far, only 2 of them have been brought up, and those are the 2 that I'm going to focus on as well. Nobody seems to be talking about the Siri and search changes, which I don't have any objection to. But if people are asking Apple for their opinion on via Siri or via search, it's entirely reasonable for Apple to give their opinion about whether something is risky for children. So I want to talk in specific about the 2 things that have been brought up here. Eric brought up both the iMessage scanning and the iCloud CSAM filtering. Hani spoke specifically to the CSAM filtering bit. Just briefly to talk about the iMessage scanning. There's a number of concerns that I have around the iMessage scanning, although I've written more about the CSAM filtering. First off, the machine learning system is often inaccurate and bias prone. We don't know exactly how that's going to play out. It will play out ultimately. If Apple decides to roll this out, we will see what happens. But even if it is perfectly accurate, I think the theme of what I want to say here is that one size generally doesn't fit all. If they're talking about a detector that detects what we think of as nude images, not every parent is going to have the same concerns about the same types of nudity. And so by Apple creating this one system, there will be a sort of blanket pressure on parents and kids to opt into this, and that system won't affect them all in the same way. And the harms of exposing information about what kids are speaking about are not necessarily evenly distributed to kids. For example, queer youth are much more at risk of parental rejection, which leads to a number of additional child safety problems for those kids. And if a child has homophobic parents, the fact that they may be exchanging images with other teens, which many teens do today, may put them at a greater risk. But more importantly, I want to highlight that I think that instantiating these things in a way that the child cannot opt out puts children in a frame of expecting to be surveilled. And I want to remember that when we think about child safety, what we're also thinking about is the safety of our society going forward. If a child's expectation of their communications is that all communications will be surveilled, they don't have an opportunity to grow into an adult who understands that they do have a right to privacy and that their system, that they should have communications available to them that are not surveilled. I think that poses a larger long-term threat socially than we've really been able to tackle. So if you're going to implement something that acts as a client-side filter in iMessage communication, I would recommend that you let the user always opt into whatever filtering is available. For families, facilitate discussion between the family about who has what filters enabled. If a filter offers to block something for the user should always be able to work around that by saying, go ahead, let me bypass this block. And that bypass should not be tied to any specific other action, right? Like if I bypass the block, then the image becomes visible to the parent at a later date. So I understand, as Hani mentioned, like lots of devices do have client-side scanning built in. That client-side scanning is not adversarial to the user. That is, it is intended to act on behalf of the user and not intended to identify when the user has done something wrong or report them to an authority, parental or otherwise. That's the distinction that I think people are responding to when they heard about these Apple requests. And one of the distinctions I'm responding to, a client-side filter operates on my device. It operates on my device that is supposed to be operating on my behalf. And to the extent that it does not operate on my behalf, that's the objection that people have. If I get to choose whether I want to opt into it or not, that's a different story. And this is a situation where the devices are not operating on the user's behalf. And I think this is a key distinction to when we start thinking about the CSAM filtering as well. So I'm going to switch my topic, my content now here to talk about the CSAM filtering. So I very much appreciate Apple's position that the type of filtering that they're doing will be bounded as tightly as they have stated in their design goals. But as far as I can tell, the main controls we have on that is adversarial monitoring of Apple's system. Now, I have to say, I agree with Hani that these systems, these devices that people have, I think Hani said, strapped to your face for 16 hours a day, they do need monitoring. They definitely need monitoring, but Apple has a history of actually being resistant to that monitoring and of pressuring security researchers to sort of stand down when they've tried to reveal things that have gone wrong in there. So if that's our one check on expansion of scope creep, expansion of the project or scope creep, that check is a dubious one at best, given Apple's historical position of pushing back against security researchers. We've already heard in Hani's comments today a call for the system that Apple has proposed to be expanded. And one of our primary concerns within the ACLU is that systems like what Apple has proposed that do a fair amount of adversarial scanning on the client-side device can indeed be expanded. Now, Hani's proposed expansion is to go from photos to video, and to buy, Henny mentioned that the problem with this is it only covers things shared with iCloud. So that might be an expansion from stuff stored in iCloud to stuff that's not stored in iCloud. Those sorts of expansions end up invading the privacy of the device that is sort of central to most people's identity today in societies that have adopted the smartphone, and that includes American society. It's fair to say people shouldn't strap these devices to their faces if they don't trust them, but the fact is most people don't have an option to not use these devices today. Most people in American society need for their employment, need for their social life, need for their family obligations to have a device that facilitates digital communication. And to the extent that these devices deploy adversarial monitoring that we can't necessarily keep constrained to the initial plan, that monitoring represents quite a serious privacy risk and a safety risk, not only to children, but also to adults, to the entire society. Eric says that the content filtering will be limited to images that come from NCMEC, and then also that the filtering will be limited to images that are from an intersection between NCMEC and one other independent child safety agency. We don't know what that independence means, and there's no way, by design, the system is designed that there's no way that we can tell what images are actually being searched for. This is a requirement for Apple, because if we could tell what images are being searched for, A, the system would be prone to gaming, and B, it may be equivalent, depending on the type of perceptual hashing used. I think it won't be in the current form, but it could be equivalent to Apple having access to a database of CSAM itself, which would be de facto illegal because possession of CSAM is illegal. So there's an inherent tension in Apple trying to deploy some sort of adversarial monitoring on the client device, because it creates an unauditable channel of control that will affect everyone who holds an iPhone device. It's difficult to imagine us walking back from people having devices that we use for communication in today's society. If we're going to oblige people to carry these devices, which we effectively do, we need to ensure that devices are acting on the user's behalf and not in an adversarial form. And the concern with both of these two proposals is that it moves the device from operating on behalf of the user to the device operating on behalf of a separate party, which the user may or may not be able to control. And that's really, I think, the crux of the problem with moving the scanning onto the device itself. So I think I'm out of time. I want to make sure other folks have a chance, but thank you for having us here today.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Now we're going to hear from Mallory Nodal. Mallory is the Chief Technology Officer of the Center for Democracy and Technology. CDT put out a really interesting report. We'll put the URL up here on their thoughts. I believe you put that out before the Apple announcement, right? Incredible timing there. So anyway, very much looking forward to hearing from Mallory and CDT. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much for the invitation. It's wonderful to follow Daniel, who articulates the civil society position so well. And we're both speaking from also the perspective of the technical community. I'm also involved in the Internet Engineering Task Force. I co-chair a research group at the Internet Research Task Force on Human Rights and Internet Protocols. And so some of what I'm seeing there, I'm going to certainly talk about. But mostly I want to focus on the civil society engagement and position on this issue. I don't want to give you the impression that I'm representing all of the public interest or all civil society, but at CDT, we do a great deal of coalition building around this, and I'll get to that and why it's important, because I feel that those voices of people who are really affected by these changes are often missing, but it's also difficult to include. So I really appreciate the effort to make sure civil society is represented here and to be able to speak alongside the rest of the panel. So thanks again so much. I'm just going to switch to my notes. So we were asked to be really specific about what we felt about the Apple's rollout and what we would do differently. So to be very clear, the letter that we put out as a civil society coalition of about 90 plus signatories was very specifically against the iMessage changes. And then like Daniel, are against the on-device scanning portion of the iCloud CSAM scanning. And I mean, Hani is also included in that, though I'm also not in favor of expanding it in the ways that Hani pointed out. I can also maybe include the link. Oh, you've done it already. Thanks very much, Alex, for that. So this report, I think, goes into a little bit more depth. It wasn't written in response to the changes. We'd been working on it at CDT. It just had really good timing, as you pointed out. And the things that you can know about it is that we sort of had analyzed a bunch of different kinds of proposals for dealing with content moderation in end-to-end encrypted systems. And we took them in turn, both from technical perspective and a policy perspective, and just came up with the ones that were the most friendly to the public interest. So, you can go ahead and read it, but the spoiler is that there were really two that we felt, two methods for moderating content in end-to-end encrypted systems. The first is metadata analysis, which is supported by also Rihanna's Peppercorn's paper, that also just came out, which is something that is already done by a lot of platforms. We would sort of put the caveat that it's not a request or an invitation to enhance metadata. There's a sort of arc of engineering in end-to-end encrypted systems to both preserve security, but then also privacy, that you want to reduce metadata. So we don't want to necessarily encourage expanding or enhancing metadata, but using that to analyze forms of abuse on the platform through pattern analysis is a viable method and doesn't have issues for privacy. The other one then is user empowerment functionality. And also the use then of message franking, which is kind of like the CSAM scanning hashing. It's like, it's a measure that you put on top of user reported messages or accounts and so on that gives the reporting mechanism a bit more privacy and security. So those are things that we hope can be looked into more, expanded in ways that don't then threaten the confidentiality and the privacy of people using these platforms. And then it also leaves some open questions that need further research, as many do. And I think that because the sort of Apple announcement accelerated a lot of these conversations, things that we thought we would work on after this have really, they're coming into stark relief now. One of those things I would say is trying to define a set of principles, then for in-app features that enhance user experience in end-to-end encrypted messaging or in cloud storage. And they're mostly separate. I mean, end-to-end encrypted messaging, when you have many ends versus one end, and then thinking of cloud storage as not two ends, it's really, it's server side. So not all of these principles apply, but just in broad strokes, I would mention a few that might be useful. So the user reporting, just to talk about that for a second, that is something that is good because it not only will help find abusive behavior or objectionable content, but it makes the user safer. Things like having, an image come through blurry at first until the user clicks on it has a value beyond just, preventing a user from receiving an unwanted piece of content. Also is nice for your data if you're paying per byte, like many people around the world do. These things, when there's synergy around improving user experience, that there's a lot more that I think can be done. Something, for example, like predictive text or corrects your typo, autocorrect. Those things are great. We can think of more ways to do those kinds of analysis that maybe touch on content moderation, but we need to make sure, and this is where the principles come in, that there's not any server processing that's happening outside of the app, that the processing isn't happening at the operating system level, it's happening in the app, that there's no third-party resources coming in, that, again, it's self-contained in the app. That's the theme, right? Obviously, for cloud storage, this would be a separate consideration. We need to think more carefully about those kinds of principles. But yeah, essentially fully app-contained algorithms that, like DKG said, might rely on heavy user opt-out that are fully documented somewhere, so they know, so the user knows the risk in using a feature, even as innocuous as link unfurling or GIFs or things like that. And then that they are auditable. That's huge. It can't be the only thing, though. We've heard a lot of calls for this in the Apple rollout, but it isn't sufficient, because just because we can audit it and we see that now our device is sort of our adversary, that's not very helpful. Even if we can see it. So we need a little bit more than that. And I want to spend the last minute of my time talking about why civil society alignment and collaboration and engagement on these issues is so critical. This is part of an effort that CDT and others like Internet Society and Global Partners Digital have founded. This global encryption coalition has dozens of members around the world. The whole point is actually to make sure that groups that are affected by this can speak for themselves. They don't need somebody like me to come and speak on their behalf. When we have issues threatening traceability of end-to-end encrypted messages in WhatsApp in India, civil society mobilizes, and we help lift that up to the global level. The same thing is happening in the UK and in Brazil. This is now an issue for LGBTQ youth, for sex workers, for lots of other folks. And we want, and already do, include some of those groups in our coalition. We want to do more, because when we talk to child protection agencies, we find that actually there's a great deal of alignment, because you need secure messaging in order to do good social work and casework with victims. You need secure reporting mechanisms so that when people come across things, they aren't scared to share them with the authorities. So I would just say in my last 2 seconds that there's a global encryption day coming up. The Internet Society is offering small sums for groups that want to do something around the day. It's around October 21st. And then this can be a way of actually building more alignment and working to lift up the voices of people that are most affected by these changes, so that we can have a conversation together, in which we would, of course, invite Apple and anyone else to join, so that we can solve these really difficult problems together. That's it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mallory. So next up, we have Yoda Soros. Yoda is the general counsel at NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. NCMEC is the organization that gets all of these reports, as is congressionally mandated, from the tech companies. I've had lots of opportunity to work with her and her team in my previous job, as well as here at Stanford. And I do think she has one of the hardest jobs in the country, but also one that is really, really important. And so I do appreciate both the work she does, as well as being here today. Please take it away, Yoda.
Great. Alex, thank you so much. And thank you to the Stanford Internet Observatory for hosting this event and including NCMEC today. I definitely welcome the opportunity to have this discussion with NCMEC's colleagues from the tech industry, academia, and other nonprofit organizations as well. So far today, we've heard some great commentary around the technology features regarding Apple's new child safety measures. And I'm going to switch gears a little bit at this point to talk about the problem that Apple is trying to address in introducing these new features. So I'll just take a pause here and just say that too often our past discussions around these topics have led to an artificial binary choice between privacy or child safety. So it would be great if together we could decide today that we won't repeat that pattern. We don't have to pick privacy or child safety to the exclusion of the other. Most users of online social media and smartphones want two basic things. They want to enjoy the same privacy online that they have in the offline world. And they don't want offenders to use the internet as a free zone to entice children into sexual abuse and to trade images for their own personal gratification of children being raped and sexually violated. Most people want balanced trade-offs. No one benefits if we avoid new technology that keeps children safer because we're afraid of potential negative outcomes. And no one benefits when everyone isn't at the table to discuss and understand these new technologies. The simple reality is the internet is used every day on a massive scale to facilitate the online sexual abuse of children and to violate their privacy by endlessly circulating imagery of their exploitation. So let's talk a bit about the reality of how children are exploited online and the scale of the problem. As Alex mentioned, NCMEC is the congressionally designated clearinghouse on missing and exploited children issues. As part of our mission, we operate the Cyber Tip Line, which for over 20 years has been the reporting mechanism for the public and online companies to report the sexual exploitation of children online. Could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a 5-year snapshot to give you an idea of the volume of reports that NCMEC receives. You can see that in 2016, NCMEC received just under 8.3 million reports. This increased rapidly to over 21.7 million reports in 2020. So far this year, we've already received over 15.4 million reports. And just last Friday, we received our 100 millionth report to the cyber tip line. It's a threshold NCMEC hoped we'd never reach. You'll also see references here in the gray boxes to file numbers. A file number indicates how many pieces of content, including images and videos, are reported. Most reports we receive include more than one image or video or exploitative chat. Last year, as you can see, we received over 65 million files. This year so far, we've already received over 49 million files. We can go on to the next slide. So this slide compares the number of reports and files we received from January to August 2020 compared to the same time frame for this year. By the end of August this year, we'd received 4 million more files than we received last year by the end of August. And you can see that most of the additional files are actual videos of children being sexually abused. This year already, we've received over 27 million videos to the cyber tip line. Before we go on to the third slide, I just want to alert everybody that there are some graphic sexual activities that are listed on the next slide in reference to children. I think it is important in the context of what we're discussing here. If we could go on to the third slide. So I wanted to provide background to one of the most powerful and simple tools the tech industry can use to detect, report, and remove verified images and videos of child rape and child sexual abuse. For several years, NCMEC has shared with tech companies a hash list of verified child sexual abuse content. A hash, as Hani so well explained, is often referred to as a digital fingerprint. No two images have the same hash unless they are identical. Currently, NCMEC's list contains over 5 million hashes that we share with tech companies. It's important to be very clear about how NCMEC compiles this list. This slide summarizes some highlights of our process. Only images or videos reported by a tech company to NCMEC are reviewed for potential addition to the hash list. Only trained NCMEC staff review and select images and videos. No tech company, no law enforcement, no government agency discusses with us what is added to the list or has access to the system we use to compile the list. Finally, each image and video added to NCMEC's list is independently reviewed 3 separate times by 3 different NCMEC staff members who must all agree the content qualifies on several criteria. I'll mention just a few of the most substantive criteria here. Each image or video added to the list must appear to meet the legal definition of child pornography under federal law. Each image or video must depict a child who is clearly under 18. This could be an infant, a toddler, or a prepubescent child, or the child has been verified by law enforcement to be a minor in the image or video. Finally, the image or video must depict graphic sexual acts as listed on the slide. This is activity that is clearly illegal all around the world when a child is involved. NCMEC views robust use of our hash list by tech companies across all of their online platforms to be a basic child protection measure that companies should employ. So let's talk a little bit about the Apple features that were announced. On August 5th, Apple announced new measures to combat child sexual abuse material on Apple products. These measures include unique plans to use device-side scanning to detect users uploading verified images of child rape and sexual abuse to iCloud photos. NCMEC applauded Apple's announcement. Historically, Apple has not actively engaged in efforts to detect child sexual exploitation. In 2019, Apple submitted 205 reports to NCMEC's cyber tip line. In 2020, the number increased slightly to 265. Apple's new measures have tremendous potential to detect countless images of child sexual abuse, providing immense relief to child victims and impeding offenders from sharing these images. Even though Apple is briefly pausing its rollout, NCMEC remains supportive. We believe Apple should move forward without delay and without watering down its features. For example, NCMEC does not support allowing an Apple user to share 30 images of verified child rape or sexual abuse before review is triggered. As a reminder, Apple's detection system is based on verified images of child sexual abuse. Offenders can't have 29 free passes when it comes to child sexual exploitation. There is no rationale for requiring detection based on hashes from 2 nonprofits in 2 different countries. In NCMEC's view, matches between different nonprofit hash lists are unlikely at scale, and this arbitrary rule would prevent many victims from having their images detected. In closing, I'll just say that Apple has publicly committed to join many other tech companies in taking steps to avoid knowingly allowing child sexual abuse images on its properties. During this pause, NCMEC encourages Apple and all the organizations here today to discuss the new child safety measures so Apple can move forward with implementing later this year. Any further delay of Apple's child safety measures will perpetuate risk for children and set back tech innovations to detect child sexual abuse in encrypted environments.
Thank you so much, Yoda. Now we're going to hear from Julie Cordua. Julie is the CEO of Thorn. Thorn is one of the most effective and active NGOs in the child safety space. In fact, I recently had a rich, famous person ask me what they can do with their money and their fame. They were looking to start a foundation. I used Thorn as the example of what you can do when you're hyper targeted on an issue and you hire people who are competent and technical and get really close to the issue. So very much looking forward to hearing her thoughts. Go ahead, Julie.
All right, thank you, Alex. Thank you for inviting Thorn to join the conversation today. As an organization dedicated to building technology to fight online child sexual abuse, we believe that balancing privacy and safety is not a zero-sum game, and it will take multiple parties coming to the table to debate, discuss, and compromise to create the technology and internet we all deserve. As Stanford outlined the purpose of today's talk, it is to find common ground and areas of compromise. Those are important words when we are talking about 2 fundamental human rights, our right to privacy and the rights of children to live free from abuse and exploitation. We understand why the right to privacy is so important to uphold in today's digital world. What's often not acknowledged is what we mean when we talk about online child exploitation and the spread of child sexual abuse material. In debates around the detection of child sexual abuse material, or CSAM, we never can actually look at the content in question. The reasons may be self-evident, but it is important to make them explicit. First, this content is illegal. CSAM is the documentation of the sexual assault and rape of children. It is both evidence of a crime and a criminal act every time it is produced, hosted, traded, or viewed. Secondly, it's traumatic. This content represents some of the most heinous atrocities the human mind can imagine. As Judith Herman, an American psychiatrist, researcher, and author writes, the ordinary response to atrocities is to banish them from consciousness. It's a natural human response to turn away anytime the subject of child sexual abuse comes up. Unfortunately, that response does not serve us here when we need to do the hard work of creating new interventions. The child victims of CSAM grow up to become survivors, while their abuse continues to follow them, spurred by online communities of abusers who collect and trade their images and videos. A single child's content will often circulate for years before the child is identified and removed from harm, with the number of abuse images and videos documenting their assault growing to dozens, hundreds, or thousands. There are cases where a child's images and videos have been identified hundreds of thousands of times among communities of abusers, ultimately following the survivor well into adulthood to the point where they have to move and change their identity multiple times. And while we will hear today about the more than 65 million CSAM files that are identified and removed from platforms annually, that is only a fraction of what is actually in circulation. Because the fact is that while this content is both highly illegal and heinous, companies are not legally required to look for it, and only report it if they find it. And only a handful of companies have dedicated the will and resources for the proactive detection at scale. Beyond hands-on abuse being documented and circulated online, we know there are other forms of abuse that actually start in online environments. Offenders are actively building friendships with children online for the purposes of sexually exploiting them. They establish trust and intentionally isolate their victims, often starting on social media sites and then moving their conversations to more isolating one-to-one messaging platforms with the purpose of exploiting and extorting them into increasingly abusive acts, asking them to share nude images of themselves, engage in sexual acts on camera, and at times even blackmail them to abuse other children and siblings on camera. Nearly 1 in 5 9 to 12-year-olds we surveyed in 2020 said they had experienced a sexual interaction with an adult online. Addressing the broad scope of online child exploitation and the viral spread of CSAM requires a foundational understanding of the problems, as well as a nuanced approach. Some may advocate that user reporting, metadata analysis, and pattern recognition are the most effective tools to prevent and detect child sexual abuse within encrypted environments. While these techniques are important steps for platforms to take and are better than choosing to do nothing, we know CSAM is an outlier. Just last week, Rihanna Pfefferkorn published a draft paper analyzing the findings from a research survey conducted for the Stanford Internet Observatory that polled online service providers about their trust and safety practices. In a summary of the paper, Rihanna notes, "There's strong consensus in our survey that automatic scanning is the best tool for CSAI." Rihanna goes on to say, put simply, CSAI just isn't like other kinds of abuse online, not even other kinds of child sex offenses. According to our participants, what works best against CSAI doesn't work best against other abuse types and vice versa. 2 additional points are important to make here. 1, we know that those who trade in child sexual abuse material have no interest in reporting each other. And 2, young people see reporting and blocking schemas as ineffective. In fact, 55% of children we spoke with in our 2020 research were recontacted after blocking or reporting someone. Online child exploitation is a broad field and will take a diverse solution set to address in a meaningful and scalable manner. At Thorn, we believe that every company that hosts user-generated content should put the will and resources behind proactively creating and deploying solutions to prevent child sexual abuse on its platforms. We recognize that as we move to more encryption and more private environments, this will require new innovations in order to extend both the benefits of privacy and safety. We know that proactive child safety measures not only protect children in a given moment, but contribute overall to an environment that makes it more difficult for abusers to harm children. We saw this play out in real time in the hours after Apple's August initial announcement. Chatter in multiple dark web chat rooms dedicated to the sexual abuse of children included alerts to those who used Apple devices and platforms for their CSAM collections about the news, encouraging CSAM collectors to turn off iCloud photos, as well as choose another phone or platform to use. As more companies choose to enter the arena of child safety, we look forward to a day when there is nowhere left for abusers to hide their crimes. We were asked to state clearly if we support Apple's product release and what we would like to see changed. First, we wholly support Apple's commitment to increasing its child safety measures by detecting child sexual abuse material stored on its platform and creating interventions to reduce the potential of grooming, sextortion, and other crimes against children via iMessage. Moving forward, as Apple evolves its investment in this area, our recommendations would include, first, engaging more deeply with the child safety community as you develop your solutions. Second, for CSAM detection, actively work towards lowering the threshold for detection and incorporate video detection. And third, expand your internal trust and safety team and its approach to reporting. From our research, we know that online safety tools are the first line of defense, but they are only good as the infrastructure behind them. 83% of kids we surveyed who had had an online sexual interaction turned to online safety tools for help. And for many, that was the only time they reached out for help. We do not believe in letting the perfect be the enemy of the good in this situation. We support Apple's effort to take input, strengthen their proposal, and move forward with their commitment to deliver features to meet these child safety goals. For too long, we have let inaction be the enemy of children's safety and well-being in many online environments. A position of inaction or little action by many tech platforms have led us here, where online child sexual abuse is an epidemic. It will not magically disappear. It will take those who are willing to do the hard work to preserve our privacy and protect our children if we'll create the technology and internet that we and our children deserve. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Okay, so folks, I'm sorry, we're really running out of time. We've had all of these great presentations, but it has eaten up our time for Q&A. So I'm going to let David Teal, who's the Chief Technology Officer here at the Observatory, finish up with some thoughts of his own. And then I look forward to, we will be hosting a number of other discussions in the future, as well as we'll be participating with, obviously, the Twitter discussion and other forums. So just thank you to everybody who attended today. Looking forward to seeing you at future events. You can always see them at io.stanford.edu. Why don't you finish this up, David?
All right, thank you. So a number of people have addressed some of the points that I was going to discuss in the first place. So I will go as quick as I can here and just focus on the things that I think are a little bit newer. So one thing I want to do is, for both the security and privacy community and technology community in general, kind of reframe a little bit about how we're thinking about our current threat model when it comes to using Apple devices and when it comes to CSAM detection specifically. So right now, as it is, we don't have any guarantees as to what Apple is actually doing with content on iCloud. We assume that things are vaguely encrypted at rest, but they're not entirely end-to-end encrypted. There's not a way to currently inspect what stuff is being scanned. We don't know what HashDB is being used on what might be being scanned. We also don't have guarantees about what iOS is doing and what OS updates are doing. We assume that Apple is doing the right thing here, but there's no real evidence that there isn't interference in this process. So a few of the threats that people have brought up in the context of this new neural hash and IPS scenario is that the government could force Apple to change how the iCloud service works and potentially expand their scanning to other areas outside of CSAM. This is something that is already true. It's also something where Apple has made changes to the way that iCloud works based on various jurisdictions. In this new scenario, it's a little bit safer potentially because the images or the mechanisms that are going to be used for CSAM are actually baked into the OS image rather than obscured and on the server side. There are also claims that the government could coerce Apple to change its OS or software. This is something that, while Apple does try and make it so that they just distribute a single image worldwide, that's not something that strictly has to happen. So it is something that a government could currently compel Apple to do. And in terms of false positives, I think this was well covered. False positives could potentially occur, but this is something that is also true of a cloud scanning model. It's also true of that Apple has the ability to inspect things that are reported. And it's also something that can be mitigated with a more accurate hash database. So the changes that we're actually seeing with IPS and neural hash, we have a little bit more of a guarantee as to what Apple is doing with iCloud photos because we can observe things on the device. We have a little bit of a way to inspect this. Apple has leaned on the security community for verifying that they're not doing anything nefarious or bending to government pressure. I don't really think that that is wholly accurate. Apple has been adversarial to security researchers, and being able to actually inspect things on a device is fairly difficult and requires a chain of exploits that is difficult to obtain and is not always obtainable for the current version of iOS. There is a limited way to audit the hash database. And there is still some susceptibility to government interference in this proposed model because the intersection of two jurisdictions is probably going to be based on much of the same material, and it's very likely that those two jurisdictions are going to be members of a security coalition and may have similar goals. And finally, in this new scenario, we do get encrypted backups with photos partially encrypted, which is a privacy improvement. The problems that actually are introduced here are mostly with regard to the hashing algorithm being observable on device. And people have been able to take neural hash and examine how it behaves and some of the ways that you can evade detection with neural hash. It is less flexible and less accurate than PDQ. In the testing that we've done at SIO, PDQ is both a bit more flexible and is able to identify attempted evasions, somewhat better. The hashing algorithm isn't really examined by anyone. Apple has released papers that give people some insight into how IPS works, but not really much of neural hash. So the downside here is that evasion is significantly easier in this model. In terms of concrete suggestions for Apple as to where I would like to see them go with this, first, there's still no implementation of a user reporting mechanism for being able to actually report abuse that you've received, report potentially bad content going around. Many other message service providers have this capability, and I think Apple is probably trying to avoid having a large staff trying to deal with user reports, which is understandable, but still doesn't help prevent a lot of abuse cases. Expanding the threat model to include evasion, neural hash is kind of by design working on a smaller subset of abuse material, which is going to make it less effective than more traditional mechanisms of scanning things server-side. In terms of what they can do for actually making security researchers, giving them the tools that they need to actually do verifications and ensure that scope creep is not occurring, they need to actually step up and make jailbreaking devices, examination of how processes are running on the device accessible, and not just through commercial contracts with various researchers. There are a few ways that this can happen. It can be jailbreaking for people that have a developer counted certificate, making it so that jailbreaks are not persistent after disconnect. But if Apple is going to keep leaning on security researchers like myself, they're going to actually need to provide tools that allow us to do our jobs without having to actually circumvent mechanisms that Apple has put in place to keep us from doing it. That is all that I've got for today. Thank you everyone for joining. We're going to go ahead and wrap up now. We will be following up with some of the interested parties afterward to deliver some more of these concrete suggestions, as well as some of the stuff that has come up in Q&A during this presentation.
Thank you so much, David. Thanks to everyone who attended today. We'll have a recording of this up on our website and on YouTube shortly, and we'll look for a follow-up message on our website at io.stanford.edu. Thanks.